At one point, WeWork was worth almost $47 billion. $47 billion for a company whose core business was renting office space. Investors saw something much bigger: the future of work, the future of cities, the future of collaboration. The company was growing fast, capital was pouring in, and its valuation seemed almost unstoppable. Then, WeWork tried to go public, and within weeks, the illusion began to crack. The valuation collapsed, the IPO was abandoned, and the company that had looked like the future of business was suddenly fighting for survival. But the real question is not how WeWork collapsed. The real question is, how did it ever become worth $47 billion in the first place?
The story begins with a simple idea. What if offices did not feel like offices? What if renting workspace could become a lifestyle, a community, an experience? Adam Neumann and Miguel McKelvey built WeWork around that idea. The company transformed traditional office space into beautifully designed environments where entrepreneurs could rent desks, startups could rent offices, and larger companies could occupy entire floors. But WeWork was selling more than square meters. It was selling identity, a different way to work, a different way to build companies, and a different way to live inside the modern economy. That distinction mattered because investors were not simply buying into an office company. They were buying into a story about what work itself could become.
The business model looked simple. Lease buildings, transform them into attractive workspaces, divide those spaces into smaller units, and rent them to customers. But WeWork wanted something much larger than a profitable office business. It wanted scale. More buildings, more cities, more members, more companies, more revenue. So the company expanded aggressively. New locations opened, capital continued flowing in, and the brand became global. Then something powerful happened. Growth created attention. Attention attracted investors, and investment financed even more growth. The bigger WeWork became, the bigger its future appeared. But there was a hidden problem. The company was expanding at extraordinary speed, while the underlying economics were still struggling to prove that this expansion could eventually produce sustainable profits. By early 2019, WeWork had become one of the most valuable private companies in the world, with a valuation approaching $47 billion. But valuation is not profit, it is not cash, and it is not necessarily what a company is worth today. A valuation is a bet on what investors believe a company could become tomorrow. That distinction is everything. A business can lose money today and still command an enormous valuation if investors believe the losses are temporary and the future will be dramatically larger. WeWork's backers were betting on scale, on the transformation of commercial real estate, on the strength of the brand, and on the possibility that WeWork could dominate a new category of business. But eventually, every story has to meet the numbers.
Then came the moment that changed everything. WeWork filed to become a public company, and for the first time, the outside world could examine the business in much greater detail. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about vision and growth. It was about revenue, losses, cash consumption, long-term lease obligations, and corporate governance. The company was growing, but it was also losing enormous amounts of money. Investors began asking whether the economics could support the valuation. Then the company's governance structure came under intense scrutiny, including the extraordinary influence held by Adam Neumann and questions surrounding transactions involving him and related parties. The conversation changed almost overnight. The question was no longer, how big can WeWork become? It became, what exactly is this company, and who is really benefiting from its structure? The more investors examined the company, the harder it became to defend the original valuation. WeWork had created something valuable, a recognizable global brand, a huge co-working network, and a new category of office experience. But ambition does not automatically create economics. The company had committed to long-term leases, while many customers rented space for much shorter periods. That created a structural tension. If customers left, revenue could fall quickly, while the lease obligations remained. WeWork therefore needed continuous growth to justify continuous investment. Once investors began questioning that growth, the entire valuation equation changed. The company needed capital to grow, but the market was no longer willing to value that growth the way it once had. The market began to lose confidence. And once confidence disappears, valuation can move with extraordinary speed. WeWork's IPO was postponed and then abandoned in September 2019. The company entered a crisis. Neumann stepped down as CEO, and the valuation that had once approached $47 billion collapsed dramatically. It was one of the most spectacular reversals in the startup world. But the important lesson is not simply that WeWork failed. Companies fail every day. The important lesson is how quickly an enormous valuation can disappear when the story supporting it stops convincing investors. Markets do not only price businesses, they price expectations. And when expectations change, the number can change with them. Strip away the branding, the hype, and the vision, and you reach the underlying business. WeWork was fundamentally a real estate operation with a technology-style growth narrative. That distinction became critical. Software companies can often add customers without adding the same amount of physical infrastructure. WeWork could not. Every new location required buildings, construction, employees, maintenance, utilities, and long-term commitments. Growth was therefore expensive, very expensive. WeWork had created a valuable product and a recognizable brand, but creating a valuable product and creating a highly profitable business are two completely different achievements. The company had proven that people wanted the experience. It had not yet proven that the economics could support the empire investors were being asked to value. WeWork teaches a lesson that reaches far beyond office space. In business, numbers tell you what a company is today, but expectations tell you what investors believe it can become. For years, WeWork's future was being priced before that future existed. The company was rewarded for the possibility of enormous scale, but possibility is not certainty. Eventually, the market demanded evidence. When the evidence arrived, the valuation changed. This is why spectacular valuations are rarely created by one person alone. They emerge when entrepreneurs, investors, analysts, media, and markets all begin believing in the same future. And for a while, everyone can make that future look real, until someone stops believing. The WeWork story is often remembered as a spectacular collapse, but collapse is only the final chapter. The more important story is what came before it. A company created a powerful narrative. Capital amplified that narrative. Growth reinforced it, media celebrated it, and investors priced it. For a while, the machine worked, until the numbers could no longer support the story. That is the moment every ambitious company eventually faces, when vision must become economics, growth must become cash flow, and valuation must become value. WeWork did not teach the world that ambition is dangerous. It taught the world that ambition without economic discipline can become extraordinarily expensive. Every billion-dollar company has a story behind the number.
Sometimes that story is genius. Sometimes it is greed. Sometimes it is deception. And sometimes it is simply a bet that went too far. Here at LEXERA, we go behind the numbers to uncover the decisions, strategies, failures, scandals, and financial disasters that shape the business world. Subscribe to LEXERA because the number is never the whole story.
Behind every empire, there is a strategy. Behind every strategy, there is a decision. And behind every decision, there is a consequence. WeWork became a symbol of what happens when belief moves faster than economics. But it is only the beginning, because the business world is filled with companies that fought harder, took bigger risks, and discovered that competition can be just as dangerous as failure. This is LEXERA, uncovering corporate scandals, financial disasters, and business strategy.